Hello, hello. Here is the Fax app from the Apple Store. Here you can enter a fax number, add a cover page, attention, blah, blah, blah. And then you can add documents via the photo library, from another app, from the cloud. Here, I recently sent, this is the New York State Supreme Court. And it's this one that I want to focus on. It's 40 pages. And it says, "Attention, New York State Supreme Court. In the eyes of the court, you are competent until proven otherwise. I told my lawyers that under no circumstances mental health to be used as a punishment. When I told John Powers they could put you in a psych ward for 5 years, he responded, 'Where do you get this information?' Raskin 2019 was my abnormal psychology textbook at Saybrook, where I was enrolled in a clinical psychology PhD. I wanted to create a clinical test for competence to declare mature minor status for my master's project, but my professor told me, My professor told me, that's not a master's project, that's a dissertation. That quote is addressed elsewhere." So here we have that section from Raskin. And I will show you it because it's kind of hard to read on the app. I actually have it highlighted. Um, let's go to the Kindle app. And here is Raskin, and it says, "To be competent, a defendant must have the present sufficient ability to rationally consult with counsel and rationally and factually understand the proceedings against him. In the U.S., if the defendant is declared incompetent to stand trial, then the trial is suspended and the defendant sent to a mental hospital for treatment. The length of stay in the hospital varies with the expectation that after the treatment the person will have sufficiently recovered to be legally competent, at which point the trial resumes. In cases where recovery isn't adequate, there are limits to how long defendants can be kept in the hospital. When defendants aren't restored to competency within a certain period, up to 5 years in some U.S. states, they must be released without facing trial or civilly committed. Process discussed later in the chapter. I just sent them this page, but civil commitment is discussed here. And so they speak of some of the opposition to extended commitment until the not so distant past, the mid 20th century. In many countries, there was no distinction between temporary and longer term commitment. People hospitalized for psychiatric reasons had very little recourse and often spent years, sometimes their whole lives, involuntarily committed in mental hospitals. In the U.S., sweeping reforms in the 1950s and 1960s, as well as the development of antipsychotics that could be used to quell erratic behavior, making it easier to justify letting people out of the hospital, led to the widespread deinstitutionalization of many long-term mental patients and the establishment of more extensive due process rights for those wishing to challenge efforts to hospitalize them, thus civilly committing people for longer periods is now known as extended commitment and requires a formal legal proceeding to convince a court that hospitalization is the least restrictive treatment available. So I did not include this in what I sent them, but I did include this section on determining competency. Let's go back to that iPhone mirroring where we have the next page. That's my Seton Hall School of Law thing. Then I sent them a transcript. I sent them my Kappa Delta Pi ID. Then I sent them this mini case study for abnormal psychology. Now, it's not clear here, but the assignment asked for responses to be put in black text and then certain parts of the assignment to be put in red text. So it was done in two parts. We had part of the assignment was due on a Sunday, then we responded to peers, and then we had the paper due maybe on Friday at the end of the week. And basically the red ink indicates thoughts that were part of the differential diagnosis. And here are my grades for that course. So this was a course I was enrolled in the summer of 2025 after I had taken, I was at Seton Hall for 2 semesters. I was enrolled in, that's where I was invited to Kappa Delta Pi, and there was a probation period for first 12 credits. I passed that probation period and enrolled in these courses, and I had 100 average in this abnormal psychology course. And it says that I was waiting for grades up to week 10 here. So I had submitted these assignments and I was waiting for feedback from this assignment, this assignment, this assignment, this assignment, this assignment, this assignment, and this assignment. And then I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more assignments. One of them is a course evaluation. And then the case study sent twice. I had issues where it's saved to the cloud, and I originally attached it as a Word document, and it attached like 3 times. So then I attached it as a PDF, and I have that assignment here. Let me just locate it. It is the case study 2, and that's this one. And so you see here I have, it says mini case study 2, and it says case summary, and this is red ink. These are symptoms and my diagnostic impression, where unknown substance without use disorder, substance/medication induced psychotic disorder with onset during withdrawal. This was a woman who was involved in labor. She gave birth. It was a fairly normal labor, and but she was given an epidural. That night she had restless sleep, and the next day she was irritated, and she had auditory hallucinations where she heard the song 24 Karat Magic. That's it. We don't have, we just have those, the day of the labor, the day of the childbirth, and then the day of the irritation. So we have, like a 24-hour period. That's not long enough to diagnose with schizophrenia, and we were also missing information like, was she having these hallucinations before? So like this part is the best to demonstrate the text difference. So when I was typing up the original, when I had the case study and it says additional information needed, I said how long were the symptoms. I would later discover that Melanie returned to her premorbid level of functioning approximately 2 weeks after her onset of symptoms. And then has the client experienced these symptoms before? Did the symptoms precede the onset of medication use? And we learn later on that Melanie has no prior history of experiencing any auditory hallucinations, delusions, or mental health issues. And then I wanted to know the contents of the epidural. I called a few hospitals to ask what would be included in a routine epidural, including Yale New Haven, who was reluctant to give that information over the phone. The point of this fax was to demonstrate that I have some competencies in health law and clinical psychology. Now, this I feel was some of my peers wrote brief psychotic disorder with perinatal onset. Um, So I have here, my initial thought when reading this case was that it was too early to make a diagnosis and that more information was needed. The patient presented with auditory disturbances, which may meet the criteria for several DSM-5 conditions. The onset of symptoms occurred after she delivered a child. According to Navid et al., it may be appropriate to diagnose people who show psychotic features of recent origin with a classification that does not specify a specific type of psychotic disorder until additional information clearly indicates which specific disorder applies. Typically, psychotic disorders require that the patient experience delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech, as in the case of brief psychotic disorder, schizophreniform disorder, and schizophrenia. Schizoaffective disorder and substance medication-induced psychotic disorder differ in that disorganized speech is not part of the diagnostic criteria. Instead, delusions or hallucinations are the prerequisite for meeting criterion A. In this case, the client's speech was coherent and relevant. One student remarked that the client was experiencing delusions, likely based on the assertion that the client believed the voices were real and did not think anyone was tricking her. If this is considered delusional, I was hesitant to draw conclusions without knowing the client's past psychiatric history. If this was a first-time occurrence, I briefly considered the possibility that a song at the nurse's station became stuck in her head and that the chatter of the hospital materialized as auditory disturbances in her mind. From there, I shifted my focus to a biological approach, particularly considering the epidural and medication administered during pregnancy, as I sought to better understand the etiology of the symptoms. Given that the client was placed on medication, I initially approached the case from a biological perspective. However, my treatment of the symptoms would involve a humanistic approach to better understand how the symptoms affect the client and to determine the most appropriate direction to minimize their impact. The client may express a desire for pharmaceutical intervention to stop the auditory disturbances and assist with sleep, or she may reject medication in favor of a psychosocial approach. According to Navid et al., no single treatment meets all the needs of patients experiencing schizophrenia. The conceptualization of schizophrenia as a lifelong disability may require the coordination and integration of a multifaceted approach that includes medication, family therapy, supportive or behavioral therapy, vocational training, and housing or other support services. Since the client's symptoms resolve within 2 weeks, coordinating such an extensive treatment plan may have been unnecessary. Continued observation to better understand the etiology of the symptoms and the nature of the condition can lead to a more appropriate course of action. The differential diagnosis for F19.959, unknown substance without use disorder, substance medication-induced psychotic disorder, with onset during withdrawal, does not specify how long the medication-induced symptoms typically last, and it seems difficult to differentiate this from F23 brief psychotic disorder with peripartum onset without knowing the causative factor. I would suspect that any acute reaction to medication or withdrawal might last a shorter period than what a brief psychotic episode may potentially last. For example, let's say the client's symptoms lasted 28 days, which is too brief to meet the criteria for a longer-term psychotic disorder, but would meet the criteria for brief psychotic disorder. I wouldn't imagine a medication-induced psychosis lasting that long, as most medications are not detectable in blood, urine, or saliva after that many days. Under criterion C for schizophrenia, the DSM-5-TR states that continuous signs of the disturbance must persist for 6 months, and this 6-month period must include at least 1 month of symptoms that meet criterion A unless successfully treated. In this case, the client's symptoms resolve to a premorbid level within 2 weeks and is not indicated whether she received treatment. I feel this makes it difficult to make a definitive diagnosis regarding what she experienced, but given that the patient had no prior history of auditory disturbances, it was likely related to labor, whether due to medication or physiological phenomenon associated with pregnancy. The differential diagnosis here, I have schizophrenia. I should note that that is what the assignment called for. You have your primary diagnostic impression, and then you offer up any other possibilities. I took psychopathology and diagnosis at Saybrook. I got like an A in that course. That's what my grade indicated. Because like that thing that I sent in the fax, I had the same, grade reports at Saybrook that I did at Seton Hall. So here's that iPhone mirroring again. Here it says the recipient's machine is currently offline, busy, or unable to receive faxes. So after having successfully sent faxes to this number, I was then unable to send a fax. So what I did was I sent it to a acting Supreme Court judge, an acting Supreme Court justice, and put attention New York State Supreme Court. If you're considering a career as some sort of counseling or clinical psychologist, I'm just going to offer up my opinion on which course I thought was better between abnormal psychology at Seton Hall and psychopathology and diagnosis at um, Saybrook. The discourse, the title of the name, having psychopathology and diagnosis as the course title for me um, plays into Saybrook's favor, that's a better course title for this sort of material. That said, I both of them have things that I don't like. Both of them had requirements, and both of them had assignments where pick, pick an actor from a movie. So one, um, pick the Joker and diagnose the Joker from the movie Joker. Diagnose the male protagonist from the movie Jacob's Ladder. Um, Diagnose, the actress from Black Swan. And I've expressed a dissatisfaction with having to watch movies at a graduate level. In grade school and high school, watching a movie was a privilege. It was, hey, we don't have to do anything today. It's movie day. They roll out the old TV, they pop a VHS in, and it was basically, fuck around time, right? you know, you, and I remember watching like Macbeth in high school, and some of these things were interesting. I remember like being shook by the imagery of the mass grave. We watched something on Auschwitz in high school, and just watching how that affected me. Um, I took that in a religion course my junior year of high school, and so it was disturbing imagery. Um, but then, like I did a documentary on the justification of using DoorDash while enrolled in a clinical psychology PhD. And basically, I did it from the perspective of how it saves time. So I use an example of this restaurant called Zan's. It's a kosher deli by the Smith Haven Mall on Long Island, and it's about 20 minutes from me. So if I place an order and go there and pick up the food, it's 20 minutes for me to drive there and 20 minutes to drive back, and then it takes me about 15 minutes to consume the food. So you're talking about an hour-long process out of my day. And that's significant when enrolled in the clinical psychology PhD. And if I have it delivered, it's just the consumption of food. So I did this thing where I recorded myself. I watch TV when I eat. So I recorded myself consuming food while watching the movie The Menu over, 6 or 7 meals. And they would range between 10 and 15 minutes for me eating the food. And, I'm not big on I watch television when I fall asleep, and I watch television when I eat. And, but other than that, I typically, don't sit down and like binge watch television or anything. And, for me, getting the assignment of having to watch a movie is 2 hours of my day that I don't want to be spending. Um, I was, in parts of my legal studies at the Seton Hall School of Law and my studies at Saybrook, I was what's called congruent with my work. I was in harmony with my work, where I felt, almost a slight euphoria with just by doing my assignments, because it culminated my life's work. It was things that I was deeply passionate about. And, during my undergrad, I really never had an opportunity to study things that I was truly passionate about. I had an interest of having a curriculum heavy in math and code and learning sign language. I didn't learn any of those things. And even, like, I never wanted to become a biology major. I don't know who suggested that. But the biology I took was a lot of, micro level, genetics level, cellular level, and had it been on a more macro level, like anatomy and physiology. I did take some physiology, but I didn't take anatomy. I took vertebrate evolution, which does have, elements of anatomy. Um, I, I, I wasn't too happy with my curriculum. Um, so, especially when I was taking HIPAA privacy, that's a health law course, I was listening to some lo fi beats, and I just felt my mood was elevated. I was, in harmony with my work, and, you know, maybe because I could see the end game, I could see this leading to a career, and which could provide me meaning and purpose. I've always, I people might talk about what leisure activities they want to do. I work on these things because my job is supposed to, in addition to providing security for my family, where I can provide my family food, shelter, entertainment, education, clothing, it also provides me with something to do. I don't want to be, I'd rather be working on something that I'm truly passionate about than my golf game. And and unfortunately, the careers I have, you know, had an interest in have rigorous educational and experiential training requirements. Initially, I was preparing for a career in medicine that requires 8 years of schooling, 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, and then it requires 3 years of residency. After you complete your residency, you can call yourself a doctor, and then you can specialize, where you do a year or two of a fellowship, and then you can be like a doctor in nephrology or endocrinology or something. And so you're talking about 11, 12, 13 year process, and you don't make money for the first 8 years when you're in school. It's not until 26, 27 when you're doing your residency that you make some income, but it's not as much as a doctor. Originally, I thought it was about 90,000. I heard it's less. Maybe it's closer to like 50,000. So, and then when you become a doctor, you can command like a six-figure salary. But other careers have less training, have higher pay ceilings, have room for more creativity, better quality of life, where you have to sacrifice less of your life in pursuit of the training and potentially as the career. So I had put life on hold for that career. I didn't want any unplanned pregnancies derailing my long-term career pursuits, so I was selective in my dating, and so I finally got into a place where once I pivoted from uh, being a medical doctor to more policy driven and grief counseling. I took an interest, I had an affinity towards healthcare policy, because growing up, my father would talk about his interactions with pharmaceutical representatives, other doctors, and just kind of policy within the industry. And I took an interest in that kind of more so than the actual science itself, although I am genuinely interested in the body and medicine. So so I don't like watching movies at a graduate school level. I rather be doing other assignments, reading something, writing something, watching a movie. It's 2 hours out of my day, and I don't really enjoy movies. And although when I did move in here, I watched the movies and I thought of myself in a perspective of a counseling perspective, um, which includes The Sound of Silence and some movie with Johnny Lee Miller where he plays some sort of racing, bicycle races. He, he's the guy from Hackers and Elementary, and which I like. My mother watched Elementary. It's a Sherlock Holmes show. And out of all these Sherlocks, there's the one with Benedict Cumberbatch, and there's the one with Johnny Lee Miller, and there's the one with Robert Downey Jr. in the movies. There's young Sherlock Holmes, um, and then there's House MD, which is technically a Sherlock Holmes. He has, Wilson. Well, I like House, so maybe I want to include that. House used to be one of my favorite shows. Are you ready? Do you know? I feel it too. I am currently enrolled in a graduate psychology program. My I have an investigation open with the Department of Education, and I'm kind of waiting to hear back from that. So my enthusiasm for the material isn't exactly what it was when I started at Saybrook, or what it was at Seton Hall. Um, I feel I feel robbed of my time, um, from Seton Hall, where I was dismissed under some vague allegation of sexual misconduct. And I opened up an investigation with the Department of Education. I handed them over every single communication that I had with faculty and students, and there's nothing that is inappropriate, and there's no sexual advances made towards anybody. Um, and I had passed the probation period. I had done well. There are other schools that I could have went to. Wake Forest has a CCREP accredited counseling program. Capella has a CCREP accredited counseling program. I think GCU might. I know they have some sort of MS in counseling. That doesn't lead towards licensure. Liberty has a CCREP accredited counseling program, but I think it's 76 credits. Um, there are schools on Long Island that are in class. There's Adelphi, Hofstra. Um, there's also PACE in New York, and that's one of the original programs I looked at, where they have a trauma track counseling program. There is Northwestern. There's NYU, um, that has NYU's is not CCREP accredited. Um, but it is an accredited counseling program. So I had other options. Reason why NYU was kind of crossed off the list, it was a lot. It's 60 credits and it's about $120,000. Northwestern is 60 credits, it's about $120,000. The pay grade for a counselor is listed as about 76,000. My expectations are somewhere between 50 and 76,000. For a clinical psychology PhD, you the pay grade is listed as about 150,000. My expectations for that, I would be okay with the 76,000 that a counselor makes. It's not really to command. My pursuit of a PhD was not to command a higher salary. It was to have more responsibility, to engage in research where I could better inform policy. Um, I could be a counselor, and I guess I could potentially teach, although I never really wanted to be a teacher until I started taking this coursework. I did take an interest in counseling theories and expressed interest in teaching that course. And if I had a master's right now, I could be teaching. My situation is one where at Saybrook, I completed 17 courses, that's 51 credits. In order to be a nationally certified counselor, you need 48 credits. So I meet that criteria. In order to get a master's at Saybrook, you need 30 to 33 credits and a master's project. So if you just apply to a master's program, it's 30 to 33 credits. If you're enrolled in the clinical psychology PhD, if you have 30 credits and you have a certain course sequence completed, you can complete a master's project and you can be awarded a master's while pursuing your PhD. You don't have to pursue it, and there was nothing while I was doing the work that suggested that I wouldn't be able to obtain my PhD. I was taking upwards of 4 courses per semester. I took 3 courses my first semester while working full-time at Citizens Options Unlimited. Then I left Citizens Options Unlimited. I took 2 courses over the summer while taking 1 other course at Seton Hall School of Law. So I was taking 3 courses over the summer. I took 4 courses in the fall 2022. I took 4 courses during the spring of 2023. And I took 1 course over the summer because that's all I was allowed to take because I took too many electives over the summer of 2023. And I was enrolled in 4 courses over the fall semester of 2023. And had I not taken Histories and Systems my first semester at Saybrook, had I been enrolled in Personality and Theory, I would have had that course sequence, that prerequisite for the master's project completed, and I could have completed my master's project in the fall 2023. And even if Saybrook dismissed me, I could have been teaching at this point, and I could have applied directly to a PhD program. So what I had to do was apply to a master's program and then apply to another PhD program. So currently I'm enrolled in a master's program with the intention of applying to a PhD program, but I really wish I wouldn't have to. From a credit standpoint, I have 72 graduate credits, which is enough for a PhD in health policy from NYU. 66 credits is the credit criteria for a PhD in psychology at Saybrook. The PhD in clinical psychology, which is for people who don't have a master's already. So the 66 credit one is for people who have a master's already, which might be 30 to 48 credits. The clinical psychology PhD is more for people who have a bachelor's, and that's 108 credits, which is, there's always something weird. Like some of the people were talking about, their clients and stuff, and I said to myself, don't you have to be licensed to take care of clients? I worked at a group home, which is, what a group home is basically, these are individuals who are released from a mental health facility, a hospital that's protected by HIPAA, and then they get released to these group homes, which is it's the lowest form of care to get them reintegrated into their permanent living situations. And I worked there for about a year. Unfortunately, I didn't like the company I was working for. It was this teaching families thing. Each home had a different philosophy on how to treat the people, the residents of the home. There seemed to be some discord between the owners of each home, and there wasn't really room for growth within the company, and I hadn't received any. I originally applied for a part-time position, and after I did my orientation, I said, I have enough time to work full-time. And they said, great. And my supervisor was complaining about all the work she had to do. And I was thinking, well, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to alleviate some of the burden. And I asked for those full-time hours, and I never received full-time hours. So I don't know if this was, I was getting 39 hours per week. So I don't know if this was like this Obamacare thing where, they didn't want to give me full-time because then they would have to give me health care. But then, I also worked at a DDI facility while I started, and I wouldn't refer to those people as my clients. You know, in order to meet the experiential requirements of a counselor or psychologist, you can do clerical work. So you can do like X number of hours with patient interaction, and then you can do the remainder um, doing, clerical work and paperwork. So, my student loans, Saybrook was about $4,200 per course. So I'm taking four courses, and it's about $17,000 plus. I received some grant money. Some semesters I received about $2,000. Some I received 900. Um, that said, like the NYU program and the Cornell program, these are in public policy and health policy, reverse. So NYU is health policy, uh, Cornell is public policy. They offer a stipend. So my my understanding of a PhD before I enrolled in a PhD was it didn't cost you anything. You actually got paid to be a PhD student. That's not the case for Saybrook, and it was expensive. So I'm taking out federal student aid, and then I'm getting what's called a graduate plus loan. So I'm taking out, you know, 20,000 plus per semester, $150,000 in student loans from Saybrook. Then I tack on like another 50,000 from Seton Hall, and Seton Hall was cheaper. Seton Hall was $3,000 per course. Um, and I'm kind of confused where some of that money went, because like the graduate plus loan was basically brought me into the cost of the program, and I'm trying to think of, like between textbooks and computers and technology fees. um, it does pay for my wireless bill. So as part of the policy um, at Seton Hall, you needed, to make sure that you always had a means of connecting to the internet. So I had I had a wireless plan where I had, mobile data. So this allowed me, I would go into Manhattan. So I had a power outage at my home, and I took my studies on the road, and I went to Tenebrow, Mass in Manhattan, and, I had the data plan with the intention of, that type of thing happening, or, at least being able to move around with my studies. Sometimes I go to Barnes and Nobles to do my work and whatnot. Um, so from like a course by course perspective, I can't figure out where that money went. Like, but going into prison, my student loan debt was $205,000. When I got out of prison, the interest just started, you know, tacking on. It's up to $219,000. I called them. I said, like, why are you charging me interest? They're like, it always accrues. Yeah, but it doesn't always. Like, there's in-school deferment. You know, I'm not always being asked to make a payment. So I'm enrolled in a program. How come my interest isn't being deferred? very expensive. Some like, if I could do it all over again, I originally was awarded grants and scholarships for my undergrad education. I got more money offered to me than my sister did, and we wound up both going to the same school, this Dickinson College. Um, that's an expensive school. I think over the 4 years, it would have cost about $160,000 plus. I think it's I think it's almost double that now. Um, it's funny because like my sister had a roommate who they both had the same pre-med advisor, and actually this person was technically my advisor as well. And I got invited to my sister's roommate's wedding, and this person was there, and we got into a discussion about the cost of attendance at Dickinson, and I mentioned like, oh yeah, I heard it was going up to like $70,000 or something, and she like, that's a myth or something, and I remember I had to go into the other room with my mother and like I told her I want to punch this woman in the face because this is one of the people that was responsible for kicking me out of Dickinson, and I've never met that person. So my understanding was Dickinson sent me an email like, we want you to leave the school. You have an opportunity to appeal yourself in front of a committee of 6 members. So I go to this meeting. It's one person. She already has her mind made up. She tells me, "Oh, we don't think you're being very sincere. We don't want to take any more of your money." And I thought in that situation, how can I not be sincere? Sincerity is paramount. And I thought moving forward, if I can't convey sincerity in that moment, then I'm going to have issues, convincing people of things, later on. I'm going to have issues later on. And so this person apparently was supposed to be part of that panel of people who was basically going to vote whether I could stay at the school or not, which would also include my advisor, Dave Richardson, and I think my English teacher, Susan Parabo, and I don't know who else was supposed to be on that panel, but I think, if I were to go to Dickinson College right now and see what their tuition is, it's listed as $71,000 per year, about 40K per semester. So that is more because I was saying it was about $40,000 per year, right? $160,000 total. When I went to Dickinson, they're like, we don't have a law school, right? Okay. That sincerity comment, I describe it as the moment like Dickinson wiped the smile off my face. Not that I'm a disingenuous person, but like I felt like that's the moment like I could no longer feign sincerity. And like I said, not that I'm disingenuous, I'm typically, I'm smiling, um, have a genuine interest in people and happiness to me. And so I'll describe it like this. Before that decision to dismiss me from college, I was good with kids. My cousin would come over with her kid, and I, was happy to see. I was close with my cousin. I was happy to see her kids. But after that, I didn't have the energy to feel enthusiastic about other people's children. I was conserving my energy for my future children type thing, and But anyway, I was talking about, grants and scholarships. So, to the cost of it, someone was posting something on, like, the internet, like better days back in the 70s and 60s, like cost of tuition for my parents. Like they might have found like their parents' tuition bill or something, and it might have been like $3,000 or something. That's still the case at Colorado State University. Their tuition is, less than $4,000. Um, so, um, and I looked at their course catalog. They don't have a bad program out there. I was basically tunnel visioned on the northeastern schools. I was basically told that this was like the mecca of higher education. You have the Ivy League schools, you have Brown, you have Harvard, you have Yale, you have Dartmouth, you have Columbia, you have Cornell, and you have Princeton. And then, Dickinson was described as like a non-Ivy Ivy. So you have schools. I was aiming for school in like the tier of NYU. So there was NYU, there was Villanova. I was looking at Bucknell, there was Dickinson, and there are certainly other schools in the area that are held in that regard. I looked at Boston College and whatnot, um, and then you have schools like MIT and Duke and whatnot, and but like I neglected schools like Ann Arbor that have a particle accelerator. That's in Michigan. Stanford. I had heard that basically Stanford was like the Harvard of the West Coast, and potentially, since my ego wasn't big enough where I thought I was some genius savant that was going to go to Harvard, even though I was advanced in math and science, when I started making my preparations for the future, my plans, around the age of 11, I was plotted out like the next 23 years of my life. I'm going to go to Shamna, that's going to get me into a better college. Then I'm going to go to medical school. I'm going to complete medical school at 26, my residency at 29, my fellowship at 31. I'm going to get married at 30. Then we're going to have a kid at 35 after I spend some quality time alone with my wife, and it allows us to raise capital in order to provide for those children. So that was kind of my life plan. And but so around that time they put me in. I was taking ninth grade math and science when I was in eighth grade, and if I went to St. Anthony's, I would have continued on that advanced trajectory. And despite receiving like hundreds on exams and stuff, I wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to Harvard. I also didn't want to put myself in a position to fail. Like, if I work so hard and I get into a school, that's top notch, I don't want to be in a situation where, I have to maintain a work ethic that's unsustainable in, higher in college and whatnot. So, but anyway, there are other schools, and I guess what made me think of this, higher education thing is CU Boulder. It's a beautiful town, Boulder. It was ranked like number one in the country for like places to live or something. And Colorado is Colorado's dreary. When I moved to Fort Collins, it was with the intention of having more green. So I lived near Denver when I first moved to Colorado, and I was around a lot of like concrete and stuff. And I would hike the mountains, so I go up to El Dorado Canyon, and I went up to Rocky Mountain National a few times. And there are other areas of Colorado that are more green. And I guess along college, around Colorado State University, there is some green areas. But when I moved up to Fort Collins, if you look to the east in Colorado, you're looking at flat land. It's the same as, Idaho and Nebraska and stuff. It's just flat land. If you look to the west, you have the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and the mountain lines, the range is different based on where you are. Like Jackson Hole in Wyoming, I've seen pictures and it looks more like graphite. It's like, that gray color. When you get to Boulder, it's like this clay color, and it's a a beautiful part of the mountain range. Fort Collins is actually kind of flat, so like from my from my apartment where I don't want to revisit to me, Fort Collins was just an abysmal experience that could be, somewhat compounded by COVID, where there was all the restrictions on what you can do, and the whole point of moving to Colorado was be more outdoors and stuff. And here we are, just confined to our apartment. Um, but the mountains, as you approach them, look fairly flat. Um, like Denver, the elevation is like 5,000, and when I would go to El Dorado Canyon, I think the peaks that I would climb were about 7,200. So um, there was a fairly steep incline on the path that I would hike frequently. Um, and when I say frequently, I used to do it every other day. Um, and But like as you approach the mountains in Fort Collins, the mountain line just flattens out. When you go to El Dorado Canyon or Rocky Mountain National, you can see the mountains to the west, and they look.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. You talking to somebody?
I'm narrating my experiences in Colorado and the mountain range.
Oh, okay. All right. What I wanted to call you about, it's not urgent, so I don't want to interrupt you. I'll let you get back to that, and
Well,
maybe when you're done, you can give me a call
I
back.
I was just discussing Boulder and how it was maybe the most attractive part of the mountain range, and how like in Fort Collins, when you approach the mountains, they flattened out. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, yeah. Fort Collins wasn't too mountainy, yeah.
Because I'm
It's
just
not flat.
I'm going over some of the stuff with the investigation of the Department of Education, and I got into the finances of Dickinson, and they have it listed that their current tuition per year is 71,000. How much was it? About 40,000 when I attended.
I can't cite chapter and verse as to the exact figure. I mean, um, I think I had to look it up. I mean, it was maybe um, was it $4,000 a month that I paid? I forget. I honestly don't know. But actually, you know what? On this topic, and it's actually one of the things that prompted this phone call.
I told you because there was an issue with the student loan. So I contacted, the student loan, and I contacted the school, and there was an issue over the name. So the name on the loan didn't match the name on the my transcript. So I'm trying to iron out. I told you this. I asked you if I can put it on.
Maybe actually, I guess I didn't quite understand it. I think actually you did. Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. I just forgot, I guess. But there's a couple other charges. Let me ask you about them. What's the
What's what? That's the identity theft protection, I would assume. It might include you in the policy. I'll look into it. Oh, that's something that the probation wanted. Mhm. Mhm. Oh, I need a ninja costume. That's that's silver. I needed the shower head, and I got some cleaning supplies as well. Okay. All right. Bye bye. So I was talking about how great a town Boulder was. They have a little tea shop. I like tea. I used to love Tivana, and Tivana closed, and there used to be a tea shop in Sayville, New York. Um, Claus has become an Instagram or online um, viral restaurant. They serve um, the lobster roll, and actually, I there's a restaurant around um, Claus called Kingston's Clam Shack, and I like that place, um, but I ever since that report that Claus had the best lobster roll in town, I took notice. I did a comparison. Yes, Claus is actually better. Um, I don't I don't actually like eating lobster anymore. I saw a video of a Michelin chef just stabbing one in the head. Very inhumane. Um, the thought of just boiling lobsters alive is just kind of a to me deters me from wanting to eat them. Um, and potentially I'm a hypocrite because when I walk into my justification for still eating steak is the cow's dead. If I don't eat it, that cow's gonna die in vain, and I pray and I send my thoughts where I want the cow to reach nirvana. But I guess for lobsters, you go into a store and you're like, I want that one. So I saw a video where somebody went to a market and they purchased an octopus, and rather than eat the octopus, they kept it as a pet. I don't know if I could. I'm I'm not a big fan of confining these creatures to aquariums either. Um, but potentially we'll free the lobsters. Lobsters kind of a trigger arachnophobia for me. Um, More so than crabs. Crabs, would think look more spider-esque, but um, it's the T-word spiders that, if you can, figure out what T-word spider would stand for, those are the creepy ones. Those are the ones like that would give me a massive heart attack if I was in the same room with. And the lobster claws kind of resemble that. Technically, scorpions fall under the umbrella of arachnophobia. So, scorpions typically in the past didn't scare me. Um, but ever since, my experience in Colorado, which, I kind of was primed for, um, I've had arachnophobia since seeing the movie Arachnophobia. And before my move out to Colorado, my aunt was talking about the sunflowers and the spider above. And she was saying, "Help me, help me." So there's a scene in the movie The Fly with Vincent Price at the end where there's two guys standing by a spider web, and all of a sudden they hear, "Help me, help me." And then they identify um, the the fly is the scientist, and there's this huge T-word looking spider approaching the the scientist where it's about to be eaten, and they decide to throw a rock at the fly, to spare its life, and so I had these thoughts in my head going to Colorado, and my thoughts on before I picked a living destination, I had a big whiteboard and I was determining, do I want to move to South Carolina, Florida? Do I want to move to, Arizona or Colorado? And my decision to go to Colorado was the rising housing market, the outdoor activities where I like snowboard, I like snow related activities. I like mountains. It has an arid climate and about 300 days of sunshine. Denver had, major sports teams. They had basketball, football, hockey, baseball, um, and I felt that this was, potentially an ideal living situation. In the back of my mind was arachnid population, and my concern is that more so than the desert climate. So, desert climate probably houses T-word spiders. So, Arizona would probably not be a living destination for me. I doubt, Las Vegas would be one. Um, and they got that new kick-ass Oakland Athletic Stadium coming and F1 circuit. I don't know why I said kick-ass. Maybe because the movie was on recently, but um, but it's the what I expected to be like Everwood. These evergreen. There's a show Everwood that I used to watch. These evergreen like trees that might have large spiders in them. And when I went to Vail, it looked like, a fire had swept the land, and a lot of those trees were stripped bare. Um, so I kind of had it in the back of my mind that there might be some big spiders in Colorado. Um, so I was mentioning that sunflower and the spider overhead. I got a temporary job at Best Buy during Black Friday in 2017. And I'm sitting there waiting for the guy, this Scott, to interview me. And he was formerly of the South Setauket branch. And on the television, on one screen was sunflowers, and on the back was Spider-Man. And when I drove out to Colorado, there's a part in Nebraska or something, or Iowa, or I forget which one I drove through. But it's just all these sunflowers in that flat land, and it's actually a Instagram picture spot. There are a whole bunch of people who take pictures of themselves by these sunflowers, and of course, I had the experience where I felt like I was being put through a wood chipper, out in Colorado. um, I had an experience where I had a spider in the shower, um, which of course is, like worst fear type. It's up there like Elliot from Scrubs checked the toilet to see if there were any snakes in the toilet. Sometimes I would check the toilet to see if there's any spiders clinging to it. There's a picture on Reddit with a spider in the toilet paper dispenser. That's a very creepy image. Um, there's the scene in Arachnophobia where the girl's in the shower and there's a spider at the faucet. There's also a scene with, I think, spiders in the shoes and spiders in the popcorn. And it's a Steven Spielberg movie. Um, I was ready to curse him out on, but then I saw that he had some posts and I said, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to do it to Steven. Um, but what was I going to say? I remember when I came home from Colorado. So originally, I spent some nights at my parents' home where I would sleep on the couch downstairs, and my father would sleep on the couch across from me to keep me company because I was having night terrors of spiders. There was one where, like, a spider was falling at high velocity towards me, and I started waking up in a panic. And night terrors, my understanding is a classic symptom is waking up like screaming. um, I spoke to somebody and they said that's not consistent with how REM and non-REM sleep works. Um, but but I would sometimes call my father while on the toilet, and I might record myself. So I was recording myself with one of my devices, whether it be an iPad or iPhone, and I was scrolling through videos on YouTube or something, and I came across um, a video of Death Stranding, and there's this masked man, this Doctor Doom looking guy with a gold mask or something, and he raises this oily spider looking thing from some sort of water, pond or something. And I just start sobbing. And I don't think I have the video anymore, but I was in tears over this video. And so anyway, they peed on Conan O'Brien's home in Death Stranding. I remember, sitting on the sidewalk near my apartment in Fort Collins crying because my phones were dead and I just wanted to reunite with Shelby, who was still in my apartment. Um, and a neighbor came down and lent me her phone, and I called the police and I said, "Can you get my dog from my apartment?" Um, but arachnophobia, yeah. I went to a doctor in 2010. He's like, "Do you have any fears?" And I said, "Spiders." And he's like, "No, I mean things that prevent you from doing things." Well,